morning, everyone. It's so nice to see you this morning. Let's all wave at everybody. It's so good to see familiar faces and new faces. We are glad that this can be a place of solace and hope for people from near to far. My name is Debby Norton, and I am honored to serve as lay worship weaver this morning, along with our tech people, Sean Scally, Margaret Lambert, Ellie Ransom, and Scott DeVoe, who are working behind the scenes for us. Also, we welcome Christine Gresser, who is coordinator for Joys and Sorrows. I will now read you the words of welcome. Whoever you are, whomever you love, however you express your identity, whatever your situation in life, whatever your experience of the holy, as you come seeking love, your presence here is a gift. Whether you are filled with sadness, overflowing with joy, needing to be alone with yourself, or eager to engage with others, all who welcome all are welcome here. Now I'll say the words of the chalice lighting. We gather this hour as people of faith, with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning, in celebration of the life we share together. I will now light my chalice, and as I light this chalice, Sean has lit a flame, which will be on its own screen throughout the service, and I invite you to light yours.
It is so good to be together this morning. I want to wave again at everybody and make sure you can hear me. It's been about 3 months and I am still getting used to this format of looking at a teeny tiny little camera dot at the top of my screen instead of looking out at a vast array of people. And there was a prayer that one of my preaching professors taught me to say before I preach, which is to trust that the sacred already dwells inside of me, already dwells inside of every listener here today, and already dwells inside the sanctuary. And so I invite you to take your eyes off the screen for a moment and look around and find one beautiful thing that your eyes can rest on. And understand the presence of the sacred in the environment where you are. And it is in that spirit of trusting the sacred that I begin this sermon with a story about a man named Jeffrey Campbell, who was born in 1910. And in the vernacular of his day, it would have been quite notable that he was born to a white mother and an African-American father. As a child, they moved to a town in the state of Vermont called Nashua, and his father was killed there in an act of racial violence. He and his family, his mother, was looking for them to have a church to belong to, and they picked a church in their town called the Universalist Church. Now note that this was before the Unitarian and the Universalist churches had merged. So he grew up in a Universalist congregation. In fact, this Universalist congregation embraced him and inspired him so much that he wanted to enter the ministry. He went to a Universalist seminary, and later examination of documents that were exchanged at that time showed that leaders of that seminary were concerned that no one would hire a colored minister. And their concerns turned out to bear fruit. Despite the fact that he got glowing recommendations from those who heard him and spent time with him, he never in his lifetime served a church full time. He did have a passion for justice. He ran for political office. He was a leader in the anti-war movement in World War I, and he taught English at a school that was very progressive in Vermont called the Putney School. Later in his life, he was hired part-time at one congregation and then served as an on-call minister unpaid later. He had a sister named Marguerite, who also had a passion for the Universalist faith. She served her whole life as a staff person in the Universalist denomination and then later, after the merger, in the Unitarian Universalist denomination. But when she was married, because she was seen as a colored person marrying a white person, a Universalist minister, and she was married by her brother, Jeffrey Campbell, the editor of the Universalist magazine at the time published an editorial expressing concern that such marriages were hard on the children and that ministers should take pause before doing such ceremonies. I invite you to consider what it would be like to have your marriage publicly debated in today's magazine, The UU World. So having painted this picture of this history of a brother and a sister raised in a Universalist congregation who had a passion to serve despite obstacles from within that association, I want to jump forward in history and paint a picture of what happened 3 years ago when some members of the Nashua congregation discovered in their archives and from another minister historian this story. And they took it upon themselves to do some of the research that I've shared with you, and they grieved. They grieved to learn this history of obstacles and roadblocks despite faith and passion to serve. But then they decided to take action. They raised money to have a grave marker on these two people's unmarked graves in the town of Nashua. And they raised money to rename the chapel in their parish building, the Campbell Chapel. So, my friends, as I tell you that story, I invite you to notice how it makes you feel, whether you have any physical reactions in your body. What stood out the most to you in that story? It is a story like so much of history, a thread woven across time, a thread in a web such that one person pulling on the thread affects other parts of the thread. History can be examined as facts, or it can be examined through a moral lens. And I want to point out to you that the congregation, looking at its history, did not just learn a painful past and stop there. They did not just hope for a better future. They took action and put money toward it. I'm going to ask Sean to share a slide now, which shows 7 steps recommended for a group that is trying to understand how to use their wealth, their resources, toward equity and inclusion. So this slide comes from a man named Edgar Villanueva. He's written a book called Decolonizing Wealth, and I learned about this at the General Assembly of the UUA last month. I'm going to read to you what's on this screen. Step number 1 is to grieve. He says we have to stop and feel the hurt we've endured. Step number 2 is to apologize. We must apologize for the hurt we've caused. Step number 3 is listen. We must acknowledge the wisdom of those excluded and exploited by the system, as they possess exactly the perspective and wisdom needed to fix it. Step number 4, to relate. We need space to share our whole selves and understand we don't have to agree in order to respect each other. Step number 5, to represent. We must build whole new decision-making tables rather than setting token places at the colonial table as an afterthought. 6, invest. We need to put all our money where our values are. And 7, to repair. We must use money to heal where people are hurting and stop more harm from happening. So I invite you to consider those 7 steps in the context of our own congregation and some people's desire to change the name. What stage do you feel yourself in right now? I know that it's very little. I can see some of you peering at the screen. I'm going to read them again in a minute. What stage do you think our congregation is in? And if some of you are feeling frustrated because it's too hard to read those colors, please trust that at the end of the service, we're going to put this in the chat box, and I'm also going to post the link to this on the space when the sermon is posted. So I want to tell you what Edgar Villanueva says about this model. He comes from an indigenous culture, and he says, we understand medicine as anything that can restore balance. Indigenous communities do not wait until sickness presents itself to try to restore balance. Rather, we are proactive in maintaining this balance. What if we were to use that same mentality to alleviate the imbalances and inequities of wealth in our country? How can each of us use our money as medicine in this process? So I'm going to read those steps again, and you notice they are put on a winding path, and that is what the life of our congregation is like as we have considered whether or not to change the name. To grieve, to apologize, to listen, to relate, to represent, to invest, and to repair. I offer this model to you today because I believe it can help us be more connected to each other, to have more integrity with the rest of the community, and to be more whole in ourselves as we move through this examination of changing the name. Now, I'm going to ask Sean to take that slide down and invite all of us to take a moment to breathe and just notice what you have felt and what you have learned. Knowing how to make repair isn't always obvious to everyone. Everyone may have a different idea about how to make repair depending on their unique perspective, whether they've been harmed and their role in causing harm. Sometimes we need help in knowing how to make repair and how to change our institutions. We need not just hope, but action. If we take only hope with no action, that becomes an insult to those who are suffering. Institutional change is not easy. This very country is built on systems of dominance. To shift the bedrock will feel like quakes and tremors below our feet. Are we up for that? To some people, these quakes and tremors in our congregations, in our country, in our world, are signs of new possibility opening up. To others, the quakes and tremors are signs to cling to what is known. So throughout society, change is needed, as well as to celebrate what's already working. But let me offer one example where I have seen very useful conversation recently. There was a document released by the Unitarian Universalist Association last month called Widening the Circle. It was created by a group called the Commission on Institutional Change, and someone that is known to some of you led the group, Leslie Takahashi. She had served this church as a minister from about 15 years, well, about 10 to 20 years ago. So Leslie was one of 5 people, although the 5 people rotated over the course of 3 years. And so although she led the whole time, I think about 9 or 10 people served. And during this time, they interviewed over thousands of people. They heard thousands of stories in groups and individual gatherings about how people experienced equity, inclusion, and culture in Unitarian Universalist congregations and systems. And so the goal is for us to live out our values in the best way possible. The gift of this document that they created after 3 years is it tells stories that may not have been heard by certain people, but certain people wanted to hear. And it gives recommendations for concrete ways to make change. So I wonder how many of you have ever thought to yourself, I know I have privilege, and I maybe even feel a little guilty or ashamed about knowing that, but not sure what to do. How can I see concrete steps? Some of you may know that people have left this congregation or the whole movement, and you wonder why they left. So I'm going to share with you my screen for a moment. And what I'm going to share with you is a web page from the UUA. And if you can see on your screen the Widening the Circle web page, please give me a thumbs up. Yay, good. So again, at the end of this service, I am going to put in the chat box, or Margaret's going to help me by putting in the chat box the link to this. Anybody who wanted to Google it, anytime you can Google UUA, Widening the Circle. And I'm also going to post this information when Ellie posts the sermon online. So this can be purchased as a book for those of you who like to hold something in your hands. You can go to the UUA website or call them up and buy this book. Or you can find all the content right here on the website. And you'll notice, like most books, I'm going to put my cursor over here on the left-hand side. If you can, and Margaret, if you can see the cursor going up and down, give me a little thumbs up. Yeah. So everybody, just like a book, there's a copyright, a preface, an introduction, and then down here in the middle are all the topics. So the great thing about this document is you can think to yourself, what do I want to learn more about? So I'm going to highlight this one in purple, hospitality and inclusion. Let's take, for example, if you're a person who's on the usher team or the greeter team or the membership team, or you teach religious education and you offer hospitality to visiting families. I'm going to click on that now and the screen will change. So we're now at the hospitality and inclusion chapter of this big 3-year report. It starts with a quote from a scholar. I'm going to scroll down. Then it talks about backgrounds and trends. So if you're new to the movement or you've been wondering what's been going on, you can learn how they see some history. And right here, you can see a piece of submitted testimony. And I'm going to read the first line of this. I am a white, queer, UU lay leader from a poverty class background. And then this person goes on to tell their experience. I'm going to scroll down again. My friends, one of the reasons I commend this to you so strongly is because of the concrete things as well as the philosophical things. I hope you can see on the screen right now, here are some concrete tips for white allies, do's and don'ts for interrupting microaggressions. Let me scroll down again. For people of color, we are diverse congregations. Different people need different kinds of support. You are not alone. We can learn together. I'm going to go back and I showed you hospitality and inclusion. That's where we just were. I want to show you one more example. I've put my cursor on the governance section. It turned purple. I'm going to click on that. This is one of the 10 chapters. Everyone who's a member of this congregation is part of our governance structure because we are a democratically run religious faith, and later today, members have an opportunity to vote. If you're on the board, the nominating committee, other elected positions, if you've ever elected a person, if you've been a delegate at General Assembly, you are part of governance. I hope that you will make time to look at this and discuss it in your teams and committees together. What you can find here, as you see at the beginning on the screen, are some quotes from lectures that were offered by visiting scholars to our national gatherings. There's more backgrounds and trends, because you may be walking into a situation where you don't know the context. Bear with me while I scroll down some more. Bear with me. All right. Here's one part of the governance chapter. This section says, informal structures privilege those in power. I'm going to read a sentence here. Informal structures rely on social relationships and thus tend to privilege people from the dominant culture in a community or organization. I'm going to skip down to this paragraph. As we seek to add more and diverse voices into leadership among us, reliance on informal structures can mean that new people cannot figure out how to contribute. If the way to get something done is to know the right people, this can perpetuate a narrower circle of leadership. The final thing I'd like to show you at the bottom, to be creative and to involve as many different ways of learning as possible, the commission, when they wrote this report, included avatars. Now, an avatar can be understood as a Hindu deity that represents a certain quality, or in the computer world, an avatar can be an icon to represent a certain group of people or person. I'm going to click on this, and what we have here is a example story. Like, case study probably isn't the most fair word. This is like a real true story of somebody who came, had challenging experiences, and left. By reading that, we may learn what we could do better to be more accessible and to hear voices that perhaps we have missed hearing. I see a lot of people leaning in at the screen wondering what's going on. I will be posting this with the sermon later. I hope that me speaking and talking you through that helped those of you who felt that it was hard to see the screen. Can I get some nods if that was helpful? Okay. So I want to finish this sermon by talking about why this all matters. I believe this matters because every human needs love. Institutions are made up of humans, and so institutional change in the direction of love means individual change in the direction of love. All of us, in so many situations, need love. Whether you are afraid of being beaten for marching in the streets, whether you are nervous about asking for a new policy, whether you are bereft that your church let you down, you feel. Every human needs love and courage for action. Whether you are having trouble getting up in the morning because of depression, whether you are having trouble getting through your day because of a supervisor who discriminates, whether you are having trouble getting sleep at night because the babies are crying, you need love and courage, don't you? Whether you are feeling lonely and missing schoolmates during the pandemic, Whether you are feeling scared that your spouse will ask for a divorce, or whether you are afraid to burden your children as you develop Alzheimer's, you need love, I believe. Well, this UU religious tradition promises love to all. It's a love that comes from many sources, some human, some beyond the human realm. We strive to embody it in our institutions, and our UU tradition has a very attractive theology. So many people are excited to find the good news of Unitarian Universalism. People have found it online. They've seen the slogans at rallies. They've picked up UU brochures when they visit the building for another event. But many of these people, when they arrive as a newcomer and try to get involved, discovered that UU institutions aren't living up fully to the message of love and courage. And isn't it true that all of us as humans have ideals that we are growing into all the time? Many people stay despite feeling let down because they believe in the promise of love and change. My friends, I believe that we can learn together, we can live our values together, and we can share love together. I invite all of us into a deeper meditation and more turning inward. And in this computer Zoom format, there's a variety of ways you might choose to turn inward. There's the very traditional way of bowing your head. You may choose to look out the window at something in nature. You may want to have some privacy by turning off your video so others aren't looking at you, or by putting a piece of paper over your camera. So do whatever will help you settle into a time of meditation. If you want to shake out your body or arrange your hands in a sacred way, allow your feet to connect to what grounds you. And whatever you're sitting on, to allow it to support you. If there are places of gratitude inside, allow them to well up now. Be aware of those things for which you are naturally and easily thankful. And as you turn your awareness inward, if you're aware of things that feel broken, in need of repair, things for which you would like to ask forgiveness, or things for which you are waiting to be forgiven, or wonder how you could forgive another person, hold those compassionately and gently in the light of your awareness, without force or strain, but with curiosity. And now shift your awareness to those places in your life, in the lives of people you know, or in places in the world where you hope that love can shine more brightly, where you hope that love will spring up more strongly. It is not your job to make that love appear all by yourself. There's a force of love already moving in the universe, and you can direct your attention and ask for that love to move in those ways. You can ask how you might be called to be a part of that movement of love.
It has been wonderful to be together today. Listen now to the benediction. Go out into the world in peace. Have courage. Hold on to what is good. Return to no person evil for evil. Strengthen the faint-hearted. Support the weak. Help the suffering. Honor all persons. It is finished in beauty. Return often to let your cup be refilled. The chalice is extinguished, but the flame of hope, truth, and love goes with us. I will now extinguish my chalice, and anyone else who has lit a chalice may extinguish theirs.